Welcome to the Circle of Brilliance. Today we're going to do a deeper dive into a subject we alluded to on the last call, and it has to do with the subject of memory, where memory is in the change grid. Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Oh.
So we have to kind of go back to what was setting the stage for this was that people had talked about this thing called the Mandela effect. And the Mandela effect proposes that there is some phenomenon where a significant percentage of a population is going to end up sharing a memory. Even though that memory is false, there's significant sharing of a memory. And as you do deeper and deeper dives into this whole subject of the Mandela effect. By the way, again, for those who don't know, it's because a great many people believe, forget belief, a great many people remember that Nelson Mandela died while he was in prison. And we know that's not true. He went on to live another decade or longer. And
yeah, he got better.
Yeah. And so they would say that that's a false memory. And what I said was like, well, while it might be that there are certain false memories that people have kind of glommed onto, I don't think it's actually a memory. I think it's a memory that might have been installed in somebody who has no personal memory of it. So I think it's really more about beliefs than it is about memory. And so usually on the Merging of Brilliance, we focus on things that we think are really, really smart and insightful and all that, and see how we can integrate it into what we know about the change grid and tension management and all the stuff we always talk about, and how we might be able to enhance that. Very rarely do we take a subject and say, I don't think this subject is accurate. And if it isn't accurate, we should be unsuccessful in our attempts to get it to overlay on the change grid. So that's the pursuit here. We could obviously just have a conversation among professionals about memory and memory studies and blah, blah, blah. But this is really more about how does someone's position on the change grid actually impact their ability to formulate memories, to retain those memories, to recall them with whatever level of accuracy we're really looking for. So before we jump into all that, anyone got any questions, comments? Nope. All right, then I'll also draw to everyone's attention that we have someone new joining us today. Her name is Allison Burton, and I'll ask Allison to unmute herself in just a moment and tell everyone a little bit about her. But she is someone, as I said before we started the call, that I met on a trip down to the voting center in Phoenix, and just found out she's got a very fascinating background, lots of stuff that she has been involved with, and practices and that. And I just thought, all right, no, we need to bring her into our circle. So Allison, with that, you want to tell anybody and everybody a little bit about yourself?
Okay. I was a teacher for 30 years. I taught kindergarten through 12th grade, gifted and talented, all the subjects, the last 17 years, science, taught overseas for 5 years, did a lot of traveling. And in the last 35 years, I've really been a seeker and follower of, what I need to do to heal and move forward, and been intrigued with many, 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 many different ways of doing that. Most recently, I read Whole Brain Living by Dr. Joe Bolte Taylor, which totally intrigues me. And yeah, so always looking for something else to hang my hat on and get a different perspective live.
Well, wonderful. Glad to have you. As we do our conversation today, as any of you start to contribute something, do take a moment to introduce yourself a little bit, so Allison gets to feel like she knows some of the people that are in our group. All right, and so this idea about false memories is what's central to the Mandela effect. And as I shared with you guys last time around, I just don't think it's real. I just don't think it's real. I think there are other explanations for every single one of the examples that they'll put forward about the Mandela effect and shared false memories. A lot of them have to do with pop culture. So some of them have to do with, is the name of the peanut butter Jiffy or is it Jif? And
Yeah.
yeah, people will say, "Oh no, I remember it's Jiffy," and but in reality, it's just Jif. And so I hear these examples from pop culture. I kind of go like, well, first of all, I could come up with at least a dozen other ways that so-called memory has simply been locked in as a strongly held belief. So I could certainly, build my case around that. But the thought that we need to, what do we say, put serious research time and energy into something that is as minor as what we remember the label on a product is saying. Like, is it Febreze with a Z or with one E or two E's between is it EZE or is it Easy E? It's like these are the examples they give, and I just don't see where those examples really have any merit. So I went online, did some thorough research as best as I could to say, somebody give me one example of the Mandela effect and how it plays out in a more important, significant role in our life. And it just couldn't come up with very many, or really any of them that I thought were significant to bring up. And so that then made me wonder whether or not there is any truth to the fact that people hold shared memories. And what I was left with is the thought that if anyone has a false memory, a shared false memory, I want to know where they got it from. And a lot of the discussions we have on the Change Grid talk about how easily someone becomes manipulated as they land in different areas on the grid. And so today I'd like our kind of exploration to be, under what conditions is memory going to be best on the Change Grid, and how does different locations actually affect that memory? Once we know how different locations affect memory, then we can say, what happens if someone were to deliberately then move you to that particular area and start to install or manipulate whatever memories you have? So I know that's a lot, but any thoughts, comments before we launch into this? Yeah.
So, T, I think this is interesting, particularly as we think about with the grid, respondents are providing information based on their perception, right? And so in this conversation about memory, it reminds me of, in my work, we've used a model called the perception assumption model that talks about the input of data, which for me is this memory that we're talking about. Be that memory, and part of what that model talks about is how we wind up behaving in a particular way based on the input of data that we may or may not validate the authenticity of the data, but in either way, we wind up behaving a particular way, and that behavior is really based on that data that comes from our educational process, be it formal or informal, the environments that we exist in, the experiences that we've had in life, the socialization as you've spoken to. And so all of that gives us this perception of reality that we wind up acting out on. And it could be that we're acting out on, we're behaving a particular way based on some data that has not been validated, which speaks to this conversation about these memories.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And so I think as we're talking specifically about memory, I think that parallel with memory comes beliefs. Maybe values arise from those collective memories. And so when we're talking about things like truth and reality, these kinds of words, I'll bet they're going to parallel, or they're going to find some way to relate to the formulation of accurate memories and the recalling of such. So yeah, so there you go. All right, so let me ask you guys to go a little trip around the change grid, and I just want you to tell me, how do you think someone's ability to formulate and process, retain, recall, utilize memory affected? So let's start with them being very far up grid. Now, to end up up grid, you have to perceive your level of ability to handle a given situation as being relatively low or quite low, and the perceived challenge as being relatively to quite high, so very high in the challenge side of things. So big challenge, lots of difficulty perhaps, but very little perceived ability to meet that. And so you'd end up at what level of tension? If I'm squiggling around here, you guys unmute and chime in so we can have a little fun with how we're putting this together, test as we do this. So this is where we're actually having a stress response. What happens to your ability to encode memories when you're up in stress? Is it supported? Is it compromised? What's going on? So, Kathy,
compromised. It's compromised because you don't hear as well when you're up there.
Yeah, Allison, what would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I would say, depending on how much the stress is, you can go offline with your thinking capabilities because you're just in the emotional piece.
Yep. Well, let me give you guys a few of the little notes that I came up with as I was digging around through our archives and all that. These are some of the things we talked about in the levels of tension about memory. We said, first of all, the further upgrade you go, the more selective your attention is likely to be. And in part, that's the survival instinct in play.
Mm-hmm.
So you're in a stressful situation. Your brain's doing its very best to get you to focus on those things that are going to be of greatest importance to you in that particular moment. And if you're focused on A, B, and C, well, maybe you'll completely, I'm going to say, you won't pick up on X, Y, Z, and everything else in between. Now, there's a case to be made that all data is being stored, but if it isn't brought in the right way, if it isn't kind of formulated the right way, encoded the right way, you may never be able to recall it, even though there are those who believe that your brain records every single aspect of everything it sees, everything it hears, far beyond what we're paying attention to. It's still being captured. And I don't know that I disagree with that, but I would say to you that this selective attention when we're upgrid is just a smart thing to do. And with that selection comes a lot of deselection. You know, the moment you limit your choices are going to limit you. That's not necessarily a bad thing. So selective attention, we talked about. We also said that as someone's level of tension goes up, and they go up to, let me change the background for just a second, so Allison can get really comfortable with these labels. So as someone is way up in stress, again, perceived ability quite low, perceived challenge quite high. We know there's a whole litany of things that changes as far as behavioral characteristics and qualities go. Well, one of them is that stress is accompanied by a highly elevated level of emotional activity. And so we know that people who are up in stress are feeling maybe it's anger, maybe it's fear, maybe it's grief, maybe it's shame. You guys, we've talked about what the core emotions are when you went through your basic sort of training. So here, this person is up there in stress. Because the emotions are so strong, logic ends up taking a back seat. So I don't know if it's appreciation as much as it's the ability to collect and process actual facts, talking to what Tim was alluding to earlier on. The memories when you're upgrade are going to be far more emotionally, or the emotional elements more so than perhaps the factual, concrete sort of elements that are on there. Tim, if you want to chime something in from what you're sharing, feel free to do that. But I think the other thing we talked about was that the brain can only juggle X amount of information at a time. You guys remember we talked a little bit about load shedding, that as the level of tension goes up, our ability to think about, focus upon, juggle, if you will, our thoughts about multiple situations gets compromised till ultimately everything gets shed except for this one thing that we become completely transfixed on. And so what's also happening is that we become more and more overpowered by the demands of that situation, the cognitive demands of that situation. The more other stuff is just going to be set aside. It's just too much for it to handle. And so you're going to end up with inaccuracies in memories and things like that, that could be going on. So that's what we talked a little bit about collecting memories, how that's affected. Questions, comments about memory encoding when you're too far?
Well, only to add, T, that in the context of our model and tool, the higher one is upgrid, where that stress level is exceeding, therein lies greater risk for error, greater risk for behavior that creates stress in the environment, all because that memory and that data has not been validated. But when one is under a great deal of stress, there's less likelihood that that validation piece will happen.
Exactly.
Our model calls for a 3-second pause, which simply is saying, validate, take a moment to validate what the brain is pushing towards you, because it could be pushing forward data that has not been validated, data that is not valid or accurate, and that we may wind up, as I mentioned earlier, exercising behavior towards.
Excellent. And that's another opportunity to pull in the, we've talked about the Buffalo maneuver, where you basically recognize, hey, I'm feeling something, I'm thinking something, your word, we now want to validate it. Well, maybe one of the ways that we can move someone into that validation mindset is to do the Buffalo maneuver and say, how very interesting. So instead of focusing on all of the emotional side of things that the limbic system is bringing forth, instead, let's get them into their cortex. Let's ask them a question that demands a logical answer. How very interesting. What is going on here? Is what I'm looking at real? Is what I'm experiencing correct? So we know that the more someone is pulled into emotion, the more difficult it becomes for them to get themselves back into a logical place, because the further upgrade you go, in fact, if it's a radial trend, if you will, let me throw out that little background, a little radial, oops, sorry, that's a complete change grid. Oh, yeah, it does. I don't have a handy one. But anyway, when we got the concentric circles, just the circles, forget all the other lines. As we move further and further up grid, out grid, down grid, or in grid, we're going to have our logic get, first of all, just interfered with, well, augmented, but ultimately hijacked by emotions rather than by the logic that we're trying to use. We need to do something deliberate to get ourselves back into that cognitive processing. And one of those maneuvers is to just give yourself a puzzle that only your cortex can answer. So, yep, Buffalo maneuver. All right. And also, I just want to say that although we were talking about more about the encoding feature of it, I could also say, well, let's move down the road on the timeline. And now we're coming back to this situation and we're asking someone to recall for us what they went on. So it's one thing to be in the state and have difficulty encoding the information. It's another thing to revisit that situation, which would, to at least a significant degree, move you back into that state that you were in then. And now, how does it impact your ability to recall the information? And that's where we talked a little bit about memory distortions, all that sort of stuff. But in between those two things, we said, all right, while this experience is happening, this stuff has not only has to be encoded, that encoding has to be integrated with what else we already know. It's not just an encoded and put it in a box. It's encoded and integrated. And so how does it get consolidated in other memories? And I think one of the things we talked about then was that the hormones that someone is experiencing, the neurotransmitters, are causing their own set of difficulties. So if your brain is in a cortisol soaked situation, well, that's likely to enhance the encoding, if you will, or the consolidation of the emotional stuff more so than the logical, factual, kind of neutral sort of stuff or contextual information. Thoughts about that, anybody? Yeah? No? All right. And so let's go now to the outgrid section. In the outgrid section, we've got someone who is experiencing a situation where they perceive themselves as having a very high level of ability to handle what they perceive as being a rather high or very high, challenging or difficult situation. So high perceived ability, high perceived challenge. How do you think that would impact someone's level of memory or accuracy in memory or encoding of the memory? Keep in mind that they would be at the power level of tension. So in power, we do know. Oh, David's got his hand up. David, are you unmuted? Yeah, go right
Oh,
ahead.
I was just trying to unmute. No, I was just listening in, but I was preparing to comment. So please go ahead, T.
Yeah, I was just wanted to say, to help you guys think about what's happening as far as memory goes here. Remember there that power level of productive tension. So this is where our logic is most likely to be ruling the day. This one. Okay, yeah, David, we're hearing something in your background there. It does anyway. And so all the things we know that happen in power are happening here as well. So there's a lot more confidence. The further outgrid you go, we know the more driven that you're becoming. If we looked at the energy map, we would know that this person is primarily the driver energy, but their energy can be modified in one way or another. Maybe they're a driven driver, expressive, amiable, analytical. We can even get down to tertiary energies if we wanted to. But we kind of know this is going on as well. So how does a driver's memory abilities differ from perhaps an expressive energies abilities or an analytical ability to do that? So all right, with that, I'll ask you guys, what do you think about someone's level of memory when they're in, or their memory abilities when they are outgrid? Like good, bad, right, wrong? What do you guys think?
They're only thinking about what they need to think about.
Okay, tell us about that.
Well, they're driven. They're trying to get a result. They have high ability and they're counting on themselves to succeed. And unfortunately, with that kind of drive, it just crowds out a lot of other stuff.
And so upgrid, we were shedding these kinds of things, I think, because of the power of the situation was hijacking it. Here, from what you've described, it sounds more deliberate.
Yeah, it's like prioritizing,
putting maybe some blinders on, staying focused, avoiding distractions, all those sorts of things. And so as someone moves through these engagement rings, so they go from being aware right here to becoming intentional, this little spot, to being more engaged or what's going on, to fully executing whatever happens to be, you can kind of feel that their level of focus is going up as their level of drive does. To David's point, that still does not mean that the memory is going to be broad, but it could certainly be deep about certain things. Yeah? Is that where we were going there, David? Yeah. And so
yes.
Thank you. All right. And so let's see what I wrote long ago about this. I think I said, yeah, enhanced focus and concentration would come along there. That would enhance things. That the emotions someone tends to experience here might be more supportive because, again, they're feeling confident. They might even be feeling a little bit of bravery or courage. They're out there in perhaps a competitive sort of a situation, thinking and feeling that they can handle that competition, and succeed in winning whatever the competition happens to be, whether that's business or sports or whatever. They're out here making it happen, driving that situation forward. And so those emotions, which, unless they're in the danger zone, obviously, are more on the positive side of things, that could actually help someone to have broader attention to what's going on. Since they're not feeling threatened in the moment like they would upgrid, that energy of guarding against or defending against that threat is now available for other kinds of thought processes. So maybe they're looking at not just one little aspect of the, let's say that this is a legal case and this is an attorney up there fighting for the whoever their client happens to be, whatever side of the argument they happen to be on. They need to be able to really remember what they need to remember right then and there, but they need to also have broad enough memories to perhaps listen for, detect clues in other testimony that might lead them to bring up things that were not necessarily in their first kind of, wave of attack, if you will. All right, so those positive emotions can actually help them with that as well. And again, they're more logical, so they have that increased kind of cognitive engagement, and so that's all boding pretty well. So if you ask someone, all right, look, let's say there's a situation, and one person in that situation was very up-grid there, and the other person was very out-grid there. Which one do you think is going to be more accurate in their recollection of the situation as it was? Yeah. Anybody?
Outgrid.
Yeah, and the outgrid's going to win. Now, the problem is that what if you end up in the outgrid danger zone? So remember, the outgrid danger zone is when drive gets to be too high. Perceived ability and perceived challenge have convinced this person that there's some sort of a superhero. So remember, this is where narcissism lives. This is where if we bring up the adjective map, you'll see words about being argumentative, warmongering, brutal, cruel, they're a bully, this sort of stuff comes out there. Well, what if I said to you, in that particular area, the change grid, I think they remember what they want to remember. And I don't really believe that their memory is going to be as accurate as someone who is at a 9-9 or a 10-10. But how about this? No, maybe they remember it accurately, but they believe what they remember does not support their desired outcome from happening. So they might be concealing things that they actually remember. And obviously, we stay with our little legal example. Lawyers have to detect when someone is holding back elements of the truth and find some way to bring that element of the truth out through good questioning, through whatever the case may be. And so, yeah. So the danger zone is a danger zone. It does affect memory, maybe not so much on the encoding side of things, although, you do wonder sometimes these people that are these profound narcissists that are out there kind of trying to run and rule the world, it makes you wonder if they actually believe their nonsense. I mean, genuinely believe their nonsense. So at a certain point, do they forget that they've basically been playing this game of selective, I would say deliberate selective memory or deliberate selective recall of what happens to be going on in that realm. Yeah, interesting stuff. Yeah. All right. Oh, hey, Edie. All right. So let's kind of now move things down grid a little bit. So how does being down grid affect your brain's ability to create the kinds of memories that would be, accurate, et cetera? So what's happening down here is that you believe your perceived ability is very, very high, but the perceived challenge is quite low. Now, again, there's a range here, but for point of our argument here, we're saying about low perceived challenge, very high perceived ability. That would put somebody into apathy. So whenever you're in a situation where you believe your ability to handle the situation greatly outweighs the challenge of handling the situation, you're going to become a little, what do I say, lethargic about the whole situation, lackadaisical about it. Apathy has an effect on someone's memory. If anything, it also affects their level of conscious participation. Remember, power apathy is one of its hallmarks is that people daydream when they're in power apathy. Well, what happens if the tension goes even lower? So rather than actively thinking about something, now your mind's wandering, you're daydreaming. Well, where did your mind go when you're down in apathy? And how does that, again, affect your ability to formulate good memories? So anyone, thoughts about that? High ability, low challenge. What would you expect? T's joined us. Hey, T. Yep. Anybody?
Collective memories.
So now say that again. Did you say selective or collective?
Yes, selective memories.
Selective memories. All right, let's take a look at this and see where it lies in. Do you think the selective memory is deliberate, or is it just like a side effect of the tension?
I think it's deliberate.
Oh, do tell. Do tell.
Yeah, they know where they're at, and they know how to get to where they want to go, and anything that doesn't fit their narrative or maybe counter to what they're thinking, they just put aside and focus on the things that they are their anchors.
Yeah, so it's flying under their radar. So
Yes.
interesting. All right. Oh, T's unmuted. T, what would you like to throw in there?
Oh, I was just going to answer the earlier one, but David.
Oh, please do. Please do.
Oh, but I also want to go back to David's. And that is, I do think that people who are truly avoiding some of the things say that they have are able to do it, but they have a lot of excuses why they don't. I think that I know that happens on some people with hoarding. And hoarding has compulsive buying. And while I'm just trying to, use up my time because I only have 25 minutes, so I might as well do this, So, or I have a client that is putting off talking to somebody and they really need to do it, but, it's just inconvenient to do it right now. So I don't know if they don't know how to do it, even though we've gone through the process. I think they're down in apathy because the challenge is really there, but the challenge is with themselves. So if you can change that challenge, it would be good.
Yeah.
To David.
Great observation, because when you're thinking about the situation in a vacuum, they might perceive the challenge as being very low. But when you change that a little bit and say, just pay attention to the situation anyway, now the challenge goes up because they don't know how to do that.
Right.
They're on autopilot. And we know from behavioral modeling that it's very foolish to assume that the person who can best perform a task can also best teach the task. Right?
Oh, no. Oh.
Right, exactly. Oh, no. So yeah, because they could just be so automated at it, they have no idea what the actual process is that's leading up to it and doing it. So yeah. All right. Now, so memories might be impacted here. I think that let's go back to one of the things we say about the relationship between tension and attention. People pay attention to where they find their tension. So the higher the level of tension goes, the more and more of your attention is going to be commandeered by whatever that situation happens to be. The corollary is obviously true. So as tension gets lower and lower and lower and lower and lower, your attention gets lower and lower and lower and lower and lower. And so the stuff that's happening down here, a situation that arises where your perceptions place you this far down grid, I really do believe you're just not so much oblivious, but just not invested enough. You don't have any tension around it whatsoever. There is no physical, emotional, or intellectual activity that's going on that would move you even up to power apathy. And so I think that reduced attention is going to undermine your abilities or your brain's functioning when it comes to encoding those memories. So yeah. And another thing we could look at is we looked at the engagement rings again. We don't have a full set of engagement rings. We got so many slides in this pile. It's becoming,
which is a great pile.
It is a great pile. There's our concentric circles. Oh, here we are, engagement rings. So one of the things that we certainly know is that when someone is down in apathy, they're way out of engagement. their behavior on a good day might be that of an advocate saying that someone should get engaged in doing whatever, but they don't have enough productive tension and or enough drive to get them to formulate a deliberate intention to get engaged, to do whatever it is that needs to be done. But they're really good at saying, yeah, someday somebody probably should do blah, blah, blah. So there's a downgrade intention, but it's not an intention for them personally. It's an intention for everybody else or somebody else, some unnamed entity to get out there and do the work and blah, 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 because then life would be better off, you know? So it is this lack of engagement that I also think affects someone's memory encoding abilities. So again, maybe they were engaged at a certain point in time, but as tension went down, and drive started to be impacted by that, they moved out of engagement and into downgrade intention. Maybe someday I'll get back to that. Maybe somebody should really do it. And then it goes even down to downgrade awareness. It's like, oh yeah, no, I do. Yeah, that is true. I do remember that happening, blah, blah, blah. But they're so far downgrade about it that sooner or later it may even drop into hypo-awareness. That would be the danger zone if I brought up that layer of the change grid, where the reason why you're in danger is because you're not noticing anything that's happening in the world around you. From a conscious perspective, it's all just nothing. It's all just another day at the office.
That's a Scarlett O'Hara syndrome.
Oh,
I'll think about that tomorrow.
I'll think about that tomorrow. Yep, it's exactly right. Exactly right. So obviously that affects the memory formation as you do that as well. I also think that what we know about someone who is of the analytical energy type, particularly an analytical may say that they've achieved that level of ability and that command over that challenge because they've done deep level processing of the situation, of the information, the knowledge base, the skill base, etc. There are a lot of people out there who are genuinely experts in a particular field. But if they are this far down grid, they stop noticing the changes that are happening in the world around them. And so because they're not noticing those changes, they're not making any changes. And so this mastery that they thought they had earned and maybe legitimately did at a certain point in time is no longer mastery. It's mastery of something that might be historical, but that's not mastery over what is true today or what is real today. So what happens then when someone thinks they've got that level of mastery is that when something somewhat related to it comes along, rather than doing a deep level processing, it's all very superficial, very surfacey. So they dismiss it very quickly, or they just assume it out of importance very quickly. And I guess we should also talk about the emotional state since we did for these two. These emotions that are downgrid, this is where boredom and ambivalence and apathy and all the variations you can come up with are going. Complacency, that's down here. Those emotions aren't doing much to enhance your logical faculties, even though you would be plotting as being that thinker, that analytical kind of type. So isn't that interesting that the most analytical personality types that are out there might actually just be operating under an illusion of mastery? Yeah. Thoughts about that? Yeah.
Well, you
agree.
Yeah. The illusions of control.
Yeah, it's this illusion of something being in control. Obviously, the person that's upgrade feels out of control. The reason why your tension's going down and perhaps your drive might be going up, so you're moving a little bit outgrid as well, is because of that level of control that you now are even more convinced that you have. But you stop noticing. You become more unconscious or subconscious. Unconscious, definitely true, because down here you're going to ultimately just fall asleep. I mean, deep down here you're going to die, but nevertheless, you're going to move out of conscious thinking and then relying on perhaps the subconscious.
KT,
Yep, go ahead, David.
When somebody down grid like that is aware of something very catastrophic happening, do they move straight up the grid or do they just flip into stress?
Well, I think that both of those things are possible. So if we look at a composite change grid, let me just go back to this one. I feel like I need to briefly apologize. Allison, you're getting an orientation like a drink out of a fire hose right now. So, so just go with the flow. We promise you it'll all come together. It'll all resonate with everything you already know to be true. Just, yeah, have fun.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah, but it's because the change grid is a very, well, it's layered into
Yeah.
a way that,
I know a lot of those pieces, so
yeah,
it's
and they'll all
not
come together.
overwhelming, but it'll be interesting to learn more.
Yeah, well, good. And so one of the things that I wanted to show, to David's point, is that, all right, Allison, brace yourself. While the change grid looks like it's two-dimensional, we can actually depict it as a three-dimensional object. We can show that it can actually take a cube form, which helps us to better understand and explain a given set of phenomenon. But we can also look at it as being spherical, and that explains another set. So the change grid is a result of combining hundreds of models of human behavior into a single model. And so it needs to morph into different shapes in order for those overlays to actually occur best. Well, in this particular question, this idea about, can someone end up, David, I've kind of lost your example, but can they end up moving so far down that they end up up, or up that they end up down?
Well, they're way down grid and a catastrophe occurs. What's their response?
Right. So do they move from being this far down grid? The red spot again is a powerless point. Do they move from being this far down grid through the change grid and all the way up until they end up in stress? And yeah, it happens at a very quick time frame. But did they move through the healthiest area of the change grid on their way to another extremely unhealthy area? Or is it more likely that in a spherical form, if we were to take the change grid, print it out on a piece of fabric and drape it over a ball, we could see that the center of the change grid might be, we'll call it the North Pole, but these other four corners are actually something that we can pull down till they join one another. So there aren't four different circles, red circles. There's only one. There's just four different ways of getting there. Now, once you are on that dark side of the change grid or the change sphere, whatever, do I have this diagram? I don't know. Well, then I can certainly show that these four danger zones are in fact physical neighbors with one another. And that means, to David's point, you could move from being profoundly down grid to profoundly up grid instantaneously, just because it's a neighbor on the other side, on the dark side of the moon, the dark side of the sphere. So yeah, David, you can do that. And remember, when we call that dancing on the barrier, that someone who's out here as this narcissistic perpetrator, when they get challenged, can instantly present themselves as being the victim, the in-grid danger zone. Nobody understands them, or blah, blah, blah. And we certainly know that from a developmental perspective, there's a very high incidence of victims of abuse becoming abusers later on. They didn't move through a healthy area on the way. This is simply another response, powerless response that is available to them, that they would move into, just because of these four spots are neighbors with one another. For most of you, that's review. Any thoughts, questions about that? Anybody? All right, so far so good, as he scrolls feverishly looking to find the dark side of the change grid. We've talked about a lot of things on these calls. Yeah, Allison, you mean, I don't know if I told you or not, we've been doing this for 3 years now. So every Tuesday and Thursday for like 3 years. We've talked a lot of stuff.
Gluttons for punishment.
I can speak my personal truth. In my daily life, I don't have very many people that I could have this kind of a conversation with.
Exactly.
You just don't. You gotta.
It's interesting. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead, T.
I was just going to say, sometimes it just kind of hits you finally after 20 years, whatever. And so don't worry, Allison.
Oh, I have no worries.
Okay, good.
It's just kind of know we all feel comfortable saying that there's a very rich body of knowledge and understanding
Oh, yeah.
that is contained in the change grid, and there's a reason why all these things overlay. People who develop models are models of human behavior are all trying to describe the exact same thing, and that's a human. They're just describing them from a different angle. Well, as I combine all those angles together, I should end up with an increasingly clear and complete picture of how a human operates. So that's what we're all trying to do, the merging of brilliance. That's what we're trying to do.
So just to reiterate, you called this the something about the barrier. What was that?
Yeah, dancing on the barrier. So
Because yes, I really think that happens when people are in the opposite danger zones.
yep. In fact,
And I'm going to get it done. This is just the way it is. And then if something happens or they're challenged in a different way, all of a sudden they do become victims.
They are the victim. They present themselves as being the victim. And we can see countless examples of this in daily life. I'm going to open up one more PowerPoint presentation, hoping that this diagram I want to show you is on this one. I always say someday I'm going to go through these and clean them all up. Today is not that day. All right, here it is. This is the dark side of the change grid. Oops. Let me click there. Let me make it bigger for everybody. See if I can zoom in even more on it. All right. So, oh, no, not you. You go away. So if we took those four corners that we were looking at earlier, real quickly, we have an outgrid danger zone, a downgrid danger zone. The in-grid danger zone is when perceived challenge is painfully low, and perceived ability is also perceived as painfully low. So you're in the world, but you're not really participating. And then upgrid, we already know, is a life or death situation. So these are the four danger zones. And remember, when we talk about survival instincts, most programs just talk about fight or flight. We know upgrid is flight. We know outgrid is fight. We know downgrid is freeze, and in-grid is fade. So there are 4 F's in our survival skill mechanisms. When you're in grid, your mechanism is to fade into the background, to withdraw, to just make yourself as small and whatever as you possibly can. Where freeze is, you just stay put wherever you are. You get frozen in your thoughts, frozen in your body positions, etc. So all 4 of these survival skills can certainly be mapped to the change grid. So when we look though at that backside, and okay, again, yeah, Allison, you need to know that we have a reference tool we call the comprehensive adjective map. So over the course of all these years, we have taken some 1,000 adjectives and figured out under what combination of perceived ability and perceived challenge or attention and drive does that adjective actually become hold true to describe a person there. And so I don't know if you can see these in this gray area.
Fascinating.
Yeah. Oh, is it?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And so when people are in an upgrid kind of an area, again, because we turned this into a sphere, this is upgrid. Yeah. Low perceived ability, high perceived challenge. There's a whole set of adjectives that can describe someone being there, and they're in specific locations. So dangerous, haphazard, forgetful, frightened, flaky, unfocused, fickle, threatened, burned out. These things can all be coming into play. Then right on the border where you see the red line, this is an area where we say that this is the limit to which a human should exist, should be experiencing something before danger is going to occur. So there's a combination of emotions that you'll find, or rather of adjectives, you'll find along that little, barrier we put in place there. So now that's upgrade. Well, outgrid, look what they become. And you can see, because the adjective map is the result of combining all these models, these adjectives came from the descriptors that all those different models put forth. We just started shifting them into increasingly specific locations. But you can just tell by looking at this dark side of the change grid, the world is filled with a lot more negative things to say about outgrid danger zone than all the other three combined. If you really start to add it all up, this is the domain of the narcissist. So what are they? Aggressive, demanding, dominating, forceful, manipulative, relentless, unsympathetic, boorish, bossy, dictating, exploitive, demeaning, dismissive, stubborn, egocentric, cocky, bigoted, warmongering, brutal, cruel, domineering, unyielding. So this outgrid danger zone is an interesting thing to understand how anyone in a position of great power can be their greatest undoing. On the way to get here, they could be in a great spot where they were competitive, impatient, pioneering, resourceful, visionary. There's a good and a bad set of adjectives that we find on the border, and we present them to our clients more as warnings. You know, it's great that you are something like in pioneering and resourceful and visionary. Just be careful that you don't come across as abrupt or too controversial, too impatient, whatever. So we use this in our coaching kind of work. When you're too far downgrade again is way down here, high perceived ability, low perceived challenge. That's when you're going to start coming across as aloof, apathetic, lethargic, remote, moody, negative, gloomy, lackluster, slow, persecuted, oh, blah, blah, blah. That's when we start moving further around. When you get a narcissist and give them any kind of a fact, you're going to very likely watch them become more argumentative, dismissive, evasive, private, unforgiving, distant. These things happen as people are moving around on this. And then ultimately on the Ingrid side of things, this is where we had agreeable, introverted, passive, shy, cowardly, mousy, subservient, fragile, pallid, weak, oppressed, exploited, dejected, abused, spineless, worthless, victimized. Okay, this is what's going on there. Now, what I was saying about David's example there was that it is possible for someone who is so far downgrade, aloof, lethargic, etc., to suddenly be confronted with the reality of a situation that they were under an illusion about. And that can move them up here very quickly into becoming alarmist, threatened, unpredictable, delusional, doomed, etc. And so it's really interesting to see how these things can all happen. But they didn't go through the healthy regions of the change grid to get there. They just jumped because these things are neighbors. And that's also why we see people that are in the outgrid danger zone, the perpetrators, if you will, position themselves as being victims. Or they might suddenly become depressed about what's going on, or they might get really, angry and start painting gloom, doom, death, and despair. This is the world of the profoundly dysfunctional. This is the world of most of the what I would say common chronic mental health issues that we have to deal with. We can also describe each of these in terms of the neurotransmitters that are in play as well. Okay, comments, thoughts about the dark side of the change grid? No? Can anybody think of any example where out there in our world today, there is a perpetrator, who has chosen to present themselves as being a victim?
Yes, I do have one. It's interesting because it's like a bull in a china shop, and then on the other hand, when it comes to working with the board, the person becomes a victim.
Yeah.
And everybody else is to blame. However, there are some challenges with the board, nevertheless, and it's interesting how the board says they want to do stuff but become the victim. So it's like they mirror each other.
They do.
And I'm just realizing some of that. And when I was working with one board, it's like the board wanted me to work with the individual and not with them, but they also needed to be worked with.
Yeah.
But so they didn't want it, and what do you do? Very, very interesting.
Yeah, yeah. That's why a lot of us have our little one of our little mottos when it comes to doing consulting work and executive counseling, and that is, they're paying us for our time. They can waste it any way they want.
But it happens to a lot of different
does.
boards. It's not just one board.
No, I think it's endemic. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Anyway,
Well, bodes well for our line of work, the more screwed up corporations and, governments that are, the more opportunity we have to be of service to those who are ready for it. But in order for someone to be open, ready to be helped, we need them to at least be on the border, at least be on this red line. Because if you're inside, closer and closer to that powerless point, we call it the powerless point for a reason. They've given up all power. They've just relegated themselves to whatever their false reality happens to be. Now, again, today's discussion is really supposed to be about memory, how it affects memory. And so I think we have to, at least talk about, well, where is memory on the change grid most enhanced? Where's our best place to be? We did say that when you're out grid, memory can be enhanced because you're very focused on a particular sort of a thing. You know your stuff, and you've walked the path, you're confident, all those kinds of things. So I completely get why someone's memory might be enhanced out here. But if the question is, where is memory best? That, I think, is a different question that might want us to shift the location somewhere on the change grid. So how would you even characterize best ability, or rather best memory, or best environment, best circumstances for good memory to occur? Anybody?
Power apathy.
Oh, that'll be interesting. We'll get to that, David. Go ahead, Edie. What were you saying? Was that Edie?
No, it's Allison.
Allison, what were you saying?
Oh, all right. And might it be a bit different from each person because of their own experience and perception?
Oh, exactly. The change grid represents one. The change grid exists inside of every person, but our change grids are all going to be different based on our experiences. In fact, we can do an exercise where we can help people discover and define what their 4 extremes are in their own life, their own thing. And then they can kind of hear someone else go, well, my idea of a whatever is very different. This, like, what is the most, what's a 12-12 for every person? And then we'll also talk about the grand change grid of life. There is a master change grid on which everyone else's change grids float. And depending on what the full range of experiences they have, how big is their world? And so it could be a very different thing. We kind of say it's also something that changes over your life. Like, I said, I want you guys to think about a situation where it's very challenging, but you've got the ability to handle it. Well, if I ask that of a 9-year-old, I'm likely to get a different answer than if I got someone who was, college age or whatever, at different stages of adulthood. We're going to redefine this, particularly if you're someone who has chosen to live in a world of greater challenge, greater risks, etc. You're going to be exposed to other things, and it's going to redefine what that location is for you. Yeah, David, what was your thought?
No, I didn't have anything to share to you.
All right. So where's the ideal location for memory to actually happen?
Oh, I did say power apathy.
Power apathy. Now, you want all of power apathy, or is there some other?
Well, from mid-grid out.
From mid-grid out. All right. So we're going to go power apathy mid. That would be this little slice right here. So when inside the green circle, that's again right. And so everything that happens inside of the green circle, remember, is where things are balanced and harmonious and peaceful, and logic is working, and positive emotion is working, and all those wonderful abilities and capabilities that we have beyond our 5 senses are actually awakened here. And so there's a lot of really good stuff that happens here. Remember, our big thing though is that this is where detachment can occur. And so when you are detached from a particular situation, does that affect your ability to formulate memories? So you're observing everything, you see it all, You understand it all, but you are not moved in any direction off center by what's going on. If you're between the green circle and the red circle, what do we say happens between the green circle and the red circle? This is where life is lived. So stuff outside of you is happening, and maybe you're the one who's promoting it happening because you got to take care of something. But this is out here, the world of interaction with situations beyond those of this central harmonious bliss. And when you go to the outside of the red circle, now again, you're in danger zones, you're in dangerous areas. So I think that some of the characteristics we want for good memories to happen would probably have to include things like that you have sort of a moderate level of, now you're aware of it. The awareness ring is going through here. So awareness helps your abilities to do that. I think that detachment might help. Any thoughts? David?
Well, T, I was just going to say that I agree with David. I think it's downgrade in terms of optimal because, again, that's where the validation is going to occur. It is that dominant energy that would be used to try and validate what my brain is giving me from a memory perspective, so that I can then begin to go more up and out grid and behave in a different way in that environment.
All right. And so you guys are building a good case so that it would probably be in this downgrid kind of wedge of that green circle. Because again, we don't want to be too far downgrid. We talked earlier that high perceived ability and low perceived challenge can undermine aspects of our ability. So maybe up here we're saying, I need enough of that analytical energy to make sure that what I'm observing in my inside the green circle kind of world is not ignored, but it is instead recognized, it is acknowledged, it is somehow or another assessed, integrated, etc. That's all good stuff happening. Are you guys in agreement with me?
Yes.
Yeah. And so I think that that's where it would be. I would not say that that's going to continue to hold true or to become even stronger as we move further down grid. Yeah. Or you guys have a question mark on that? Yeah, you're like, I don't know about that.
No, I would agree with you, T.
Yeah. And I
would agree with you. The further down grid you go, the more you're going to forget.
Yeah, or not pay attention to begin with. It's not
right.
Get encoded or encoded in a useful sort of a way where there is this conscious deliberateness that's happening in this section, the change grid. Keep in mind that that green circle is mostly power. And so all those good logical faculties are front and center, and you've got a good bit of, it's not just confidence, it's actually more about surety. It's about knowing something as being correct, but you're not pulled into it. So you're in the world, but not of it. You're letting the winds of heaven dance around you, but you are still doing things that involve analytical energies, and maybe just maybe formulating good, long-term, useful, accurate memories is one of those things. Tim, what do you want to throw in there?
Yeah, I was just going to say to your question, yeah, if you go too far down grid, if you go outside the red circle, I think at that point, the analysis is not so much to validate for accuracy, but searching the memory bank for those memories that will support my position.
There you are. There you are. And so that's really more about selective recall of memory rather than it like the selective encoding of memories, which I think what was happening a little bit further out grid. Yeah, good point. Really good point. And so I would be building the case that yet again, these kinds of optimum human performance situations occur when there is moderation in both our perceived ability and our perceived challenge, which leads to moderation in our level of drive and the level of tension we're experiencing. And so in this world of moderation, our senses are probably going to be more reliable in the gathering of information and sending that information to whatever part of the brain wants to decide what should be paid attention to and not paid attention to. I guess I'm kind of feeling that if I'm in the middle of the change grid, when it comes to deciding what's important, my brain is going like, maybe someday that could be, maybe, well, man, we might need that. Okay, let's stay, there, it's doing a really good job of thoroughly processing and encoding whatever happens to be going on. And the opposite is true when you're outside of the red circle or you're in those danger zones. Yeah. Okay, so that's our time for today. What I'd like to do on Tuesday's call, if you guys might find this interesting, is, why is it then that moving someone deliberately away from the green circle and maybe upgrid too far or further outgrid, downgrid, or ingrid in that green circle, why might that serve my agenda to manipulate or control you well? So again, that we assume anytime we're talking about these whole world of manipulation, deliberate manipulation, this is what's happening in the outgrid quadrant, and perhaps most specifically in the danger zone. Nevertheless, these people are in positions of power, influence, whatever. And if we aren't thoughtful in our world of the oracle of the self, if we're not really responsible for where our thoughts are going, we could easily be manipulated. And I believe that the most powerful manipulation there is for someone to install false memories in the person or the population they're trying to influence. So just ruminate on that, and we can get into it in greater detail on Tuesday. But why would the ultimate manipulator want to have their ultimate goal be to install false memories? Not false beliefs, false memories.
Or murder.
Yeah, well, there we go. It's gonna go to all kinds of negative places by what they're doing. And so obviously the lesson is going to be, how do we defend against that? But we have to be able to recognize it and understand it in action before we can begin to do those things that will help us to defend ourselves and others from those manipulations that are happening. All right. All right, with that, final questions, final comments?
Good session.
All righty, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Allison, thank you so much for joining in with us.
Final comment, I will, fascinating. And I will be out of town cruising down the rivers in Europe until October 25th. So hopefully I'll see you after that.
Well, yeah, and do know that all of our sessions are recorded, and then we put them up on our YouTube channel. And, depending on what the time difference is, you might want to jump into one and just let us know how your tension.
Oh, no, I love you guys. No, this is going back. I used to live in Germany 5 years, so this is going back home.
Oh, well, good for you then. All right, well, have
Yeah.
a wonderful time, and we look forward to having you join us again.
Thank you.
Don't have selective memories.
Yeah.
Oh, heck no.
Okay, thanks everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Have a good day, everyone.
You too.